When the pregnancy test came positive, Emma ran to the parish house, but Father Daniel didn't smile. He looked at the test and said, "You need to get rid of this. Now." Emma felt the ground disappear. Her hands trembled. The man who embraced her in secret, who promised eternal love, now spoke of solving the problem, as if she were just another mistake to be erased. Her heart seemed to shatter. But how could he demand that? The same priest who condemned abortion from the pulpit every Sunday, who preached about the sanctity of life, what happened to transform love into despair. What came after was even more cruel, and it changed Emma's life forever. Comment. Is this hypocrisy or desperation? I want to know your opinion. My name is Emma, and today, after everything I've been through, I still wonder how I let things go so far. I grew up in a Catholic family. We weren't fanatics, but faith was always present. My grandmother took me to Mass every Sunday at the small church of St. Joseph in a quiet town in the countryside. The stone walls, the smell of incense, the lit candles, all of that brought me peace. It was a safe place, or at least I thought it was. When I turned 18, I began to get more involved with the parish community. I helped with catechism, organized bazaars, participated in the choir. I wanted to make a difference. I believed I was serving God, and it was in this context that I met Father Daniel. He had arrived a few months earlier, coming from another diocese. He was young for a priest, 30-something perhaps. He had a kind smile, a calm voice. At Masses, he spoke about compassion, about forgiveness, about love for one's neighbor, and people adored him. The ladies commented, "What a wonderful priest." Young people approached him. I approached him too. At first, they were simple conversations. He asked me about catechism, about event preparations. I responded enthusiastically. It was good to be heard. It was good to feel that my opinion mattered. Gradually, the conversations became more frequent. He began to ask me for help with tasks in the sacristy, with organizing the parish documents. I accepted without thinking twice. After all, he was a priest, a man of God. I trusted him completely. It was on a Thursday afternoon that everything began to change. I was alone in the sacristy organizing the registry books when he came in. He locked the door behind him. My heart jumped, not from fear, but from something I couldn't name yet. "Emma," he said, approaching, "do you know how special you are to me?" I was speechless. My face heated up. My fingers trembled. I looked away, trying to hide my nervousness. "Father Daniel, Please," he interrupted, gently placing his hand on my shoulder. "Don't call me that when we're alone. You can just call me Daniel." I didn't know what to say. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. He stood there, still looking into my eyes, and then for the first time he touched my face. "You're beautiful, Emma, and I can't stop thinking about you." That shocked me, but at the same time, something inside me ignited. I felt seen, desired, important. No one had ever looked at me that way, and I, naive, confused, thought that was love. In the following days, everything changed between us. He began to send me messages on his cell phone, long, affectionate, intimate messages. He said I was different, that God had placed me in his path for a reason. I believed it. I wanted to believe it. Visits to the sacristy became more frequent. He kissed me for the first time on one of those silent afternoons. I trembled all over. Part of me knew that was wrong. But another part, the part that felt loved for the first time, didn't want to stop. He told me, "Emma, what we feel isn't a sin. Love is never a sin. It's the church that doesn't understand." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that what we were living was pure, even if hidden, even if forbidden. Months passed. Our relationship intensified. He called me to the parish house late at night when everyone had already left. We talked for hours. He told me he was thinking about leaving the priesthood, that he wanted a normal life, a life with me. "I just need a little more time, Emma. I need to resolve some things. But I promise we'll be together." I believed him. Every word, every promise. But meanwhile, he continued going up to the pulpit every Sunday. He preached about fidelity, about chastity, about the sanctity of matrimony, and I, sitting in the church pew, listened to everything in silence. Sometimes he glanced at me while speaking, and I felt my heart tighten. It was as if we were living two lives, the secret life, the hidden life, and the public life, where he was the perfect priest, and I was just another believer. One day, I began to feel strange. Morning nausea, constant fatigue. My breasts hurt. I ignored the signs for weeks, until a friend suggested, "Emma, have you thought about taking a pregnancy test?" My world stopped. I bought the test at a pharmacy in another town. I couldn't risk anyone seeing me. I locked the bathroom door at home and waited the interminable minutes. When I looked at the result, my legs weakened. 2 lines. Positive. I sat on the cold bathroom floor and cried, not from joy, but from panic, from fear, from uncertainty. What was going to happen now? What would he say? I grabbed my cell phone with trembling hands and sent a message. "I need to talk to you. Urgent." He responded almost immediately. "Come to the parish house. Now." I ran through the empty streets on that cold night. My heart beat erratically. I clutched the pregnancy test inside my coat pocket. When I arrived, the light in the living room was on. He opened the door before I even knocked. "What happened?" he asked, quickly pulling me inside. I couldn't speak. I just took the test from my pocket and extended it toward him. He took it, looked, and his face changed completely. The color disappeared. His eyes widened. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "Daniel!" I began with a trembling voice. "I know this is scary, but we're going to—" "No." That word cut through the air like a blade. "No?" I repeated, confused. "What do you mean?" He threw the test on the table and ran his hands over his face. He took a deep breath, and when he looked at me again, he was no longer the man I knew. He was someone else, a stranger. "Emma, you need to get rid of this." I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. The walls spun around me. "What? You need to resolve this," he repeated more firmly. "Now." "Resolve?" My voice came out choked. "Are you talking about abortion? You?" He looked away. I couldn't believe it. This was the same man who, last Sunday, had preached from the pulpit about the sanctity of life, who had condemned abortion vehemently, who had cited Bible verses about protecting the innocent. "You can't be serious," I said, feeling the tears streaming down. "Emma, think carefully. If this comes to light, my career ends, my life ends, and yours too. Do you want everyone to know? Do you want to be pointed out as the woman who destroyed a priest?" Those words crushed me. He wasn't worried about me, not about the baby, only about himself. "But you said you loved me," I whispered. He remained silent, and in that silence, everything crumbled. I left the parish house that night with trembling legs. I don't even know how I managed to get home. The streets were empty, but I felt as if the whole world were watching me, judging me, condemning me. When I closed my bedroom door, I collapsed. I cried until I had no more tears. My pillow was soaked. My body trembled. I couldn't stop hearing his words in my head. "You need to get rid of this." How could he say that? How? In the following days, I tried to talk to him. I sent messages. I called. Nothing. He blocked me. He simply disappeared, as if I had never existed. As if everything we lived had meant absolutely nothing. I felt disposable, used, thrown away like garbage. The following Sunday, I went to Mass. I don't know why I went. Maybe because I still had hope. Maybe because I wanted to face him. Maybe because I needed to understand. When I entered the church, he was already at the altar, preparing for the celebration. He saw me. I know he saw me. But he immediately looked away, as if I were invisible. I sat in the back pew, trying to hide. My heart beat erratically. I wanted to run away. But I stayed. I needed to stay. And then he began the homily. "Dear brothers and sisters," he said with that calm voice I knew so well, "today I want to talk about the sanctity of life, about how God calls us to protect the innocent, about how abortion is one of the greatest sins anyone can commit." I felt my stomach turn. He continued, There are people who justify this terrible act, who say it's a personal choice, but it isn't. It's murder. It's taking the life of a defenseless human being, and whoever commits this sin carries eternal guilt. I pressed my hands against the pew. My nails dug into the wood. He was talking to me. I knew it. He was pressuring me publicly, without anyone noticing. And those who encourage this act, he said, looking directly at me for an instant, are also accomplices. They will also carry this guilt. Tears began to stream down my face. I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and ran out of the church. I heard some murmurs behind me, but I didn't care. I needed to get out of there. That night, alone in my room, I looked at the ceiling and thought, he's manipulating me. He wants me to do this out of fear, out of guilt. But at the same time, a part of me still loved him, still wanted to believe he would change his mind, that he would go back to being the man I knew, the man who made me feel special. I spent weeks in agony. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. My mother began to notice something was wrong, but I lied. I said everything was fine, that it was just tiredness. How could I tell the truth? How could I say, I'm pregnant by our parish priest? I tried one more time to talk to Daniel. I waited outside the parish house until he came out. When he saw me, his face closed. Emma, what are you doing here? Daniel, please, we need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, he said coldly, looking around to make sure no one was watching. Have you resolved the problem yet? Problem. My voice came out trembling. Is that what you call our child? Problem. He clenched his teeth. Lower your voice. Why? Are you afraid someone will find out? Are you afraid of losing your position? Emma, you're being irrational. Irrational? I almost shouted. I'm pregnant, and you're asking me to have an abortion. You, who preach against it every Sunday. He grabbed me by the arm, hard. For the first time, I felt afraid of him. You're going to do what I'm telling you, he whispered through clenched teeth, or I'm going to destroy you. I'll tell everyone that you seduced me, that you tried to seduce me, that you're a desperate woman who invented this pregnancy to harm me. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. You would do that? He let me go. He adjusted his cassock and said, Make your choice, Emma. Then he turned and entered the parish house, closing the door in my face. I stood there, motionless, for how long I don't know. Tears streamed silently. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I felt was an immense emptiness. In the days that followed, I entered a spiral of despair. I searched about abortion on the internet. I read testimonies from women who went through it. Some said they didn't regret it. Others said the guilt consumed them to this day. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to have this baby, wanted to prove to Daniel that I was strong, that I didn't need him. But another part was afraid of judgment, afraid of loneliness, afraid of raising a child alone, while everyone pointed at me as the woman who ruined a priest. I began to have dark thoughts. It would be easier if I just disappeared, I thought. It would be better for everyone. It was at this moment that my best friend, Sophie, noticed something was very wrong. She showed up at my house without warning and found my room a mess. Me on the floor, crying. Emma, what's happening? She asked, frightened. I couldn't hide any more. I broke down. I told everything, every detail, every lie, every broken promise, every cruel word. Sophie was shocked. She hugged me tight and said, Emma, you're not alone. I'm here, and we're going to resolve this together. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small relief. Someone knew, someone believed me, someone was on my side. But doubt still gnawed at me. What am I going to do? Sophie took my hand and said, You don't need to decide now, but one thing I can tell you, don't do anything because of him. Do what's right for you. Those words kept echoing in my head. Do what's right for you. But what was right? I didn't know any more. I didn't know anything. That night, lying in bed, I placed my hand on my still flat belly and whispered, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of this. I still didn't know what I was going to do, but one thing was certain. Daniel had shown me who he really was, and I could never trust him again. The man I loved didn't exist. He never existed. He was just an illusion, a mask he wore to get what he wanted. And now, I was alone, pregnant, lost, and scared. But something inside me began to change. A small flame of anger, of indignation, of determination. If he thought I was simply going to disappear, he was wrong. I was going to fight. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to fight, because I was no longer the naive girl who believed his every word. I was someone else now, someone who had been broken, but who was beginning to pick up the pieces. And this was just the beginning. Sophie convinced me to seek help. "You need to talk to someone who understands," she said. "Someone who can guide you." I didn't know who to turn to. I couldn't tell my family. I couldn't tell the church community. Everyone would see Daniel as the victim, and me as the seductress, the sinner, the woman who destroyed a man of God. But Sophie knew a psychologist in a neighboring town, about 50 kilometers away. She made an appointment for me. I went, hidden, afraid that someone would recognize me. The psychologist, a woman named Dr. Claire, listened to me patiently. She didn't judge me. She didn't interrupt me. She just listened. And when I finished telling everything, she said something that marked me forever. "Emma, what you're describing isn't love. It's manipulation. It's abuse of power. He used your vulnerability, your faith, to get what he wanted. And now he's trying to blame you for the result." Those words were like a punch in the stomach, because deep down, I knew it was true. But hearing it from someone else made everything more real, more painful. "But I was also guilty," I said with a choked voice. "I accepted. I let it happen." "No," she said firmly. "He was in a position of authority, of trust. He had power over you, Emma. This wasn't a relationship between equals. It was abuse." I left that session with a confused mind. Part of me wanted to believe that. Part of me still defended him, still thought that somehow I was responsible. But something changed inside me that day. A small seed of clarity began to grow. Meanwhile, life in town continued. I still needed to leave the house, go to the market, cross paths with people I knew, and that's when everything began to crumble. One day, at the pharmacy, I ran into Mrs. Margaret, one of the oldest parishioners. She had always been kind to me, but that day, when our eyes met, she quickly looked away and left through the door without saying a word. My heart sank. In the following days, I noticed that people were avoiding me. Conversations were interrupted when I approached. Judgmental looks followed me through the streets, whispers behind me. I didn't understand. How did they know? That's when I found out. Daniel had started planting seeds. He didn't say directly that I was pregnant, but he began making subtle comments during sermons, comments about women who try to seduce men of God, about false accusations, about people who invent stories to destroy reputations. He was building a narrative, and people were believing it. One morning, I found an anonymous letter under my door. I opened it with trembling hands. The handwritten words said, "You should be ashamed. Leave our priest alone. No one believes your lies." I collapsed on the floor. I cried until I had no more tears. They thought I was lying. They thought I was the villain. Sophie was furious when I told her, "Emma, you need to expose him. You need to tell the truth." "And who's going to believe me?" I asked, desperate. "He's the priest. I'm just me." But the situation only got worse. The following Sunday, I went to Mass once again. I don't know why I insisted. Maybe because I still wanted to believe there was some justice, some hope. Daniel went up to the pulpit as always. His face was serene, calm, as if nothing had happened. He spoke about forgiveness, about how God forgives even the worst sinners. But then he looked directly at me and said, "But there are those who choose to live in sin, who choose to lie, manipulate, and destroy. And for these people, the only salvation is sincere confession and true repentance." I felt as if all eyes in the church were on me. My face burned, my hands trembled. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone the truth, but my voice was stuck in my throat. When Mass ended, several people approached Daniel to congratulate him on the sermon. Meanwhile, I was ignored, treated like a ghost. I ran out of the church. I couldn't take it anymore. That afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. You still haven't resolved the problem. What are you waiting for? Do you want me to tell your mother? It was him. I knew it. My entire body trembled with anger and fear. He was threatening me. He was using my own family against me. I blocked the number, but the message had already had its effect. I was terrified. In the following days, I began having panic attacks. I woke up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat with my heart racing. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I lost weight. My mother began asking questions. "Emma, are you sick? Do you need to go to the doctor?" "I'm fine, Mom," I lied. "It's just tiredness." But I wasn't fine. I was far from fine. Sophie insisted that I report him. "He can't do this to you, Emma. It's a crime. It's abuse." "And who's going to believe me?" I repeated. "He's already turned the whole town against me." But then something unexpected happened. An older woman named Helen came looking for me. She knocked on my door one afternoon and asked to talk. I knew her vaguely. She attended church, but always stayed quiet in the back. "Emma," she said, sitting in my living room, "I know what's happening." My heart raced. "How do you—" "Because it already happened to me," she said, with tears in her eyes. I was shocked. 15 years ago, she continued, before Father Daniel arrived here, there was another priest in the parish, Father Thomas. He did the same thing to me. I couldn't believe it. What? He seduced me, said he loved me, said he was going to leave the priesthood for me, and when I got pregnant, he abandoned me, pressured me to have an abortion, and when I refused, he spread lies about me, said I was unstable, that I made up stories. Tears streamed down her face. "And what happened?" I asked with a trembling voice. "I lost the baby, a miscarriage." And he continued in the parish, as if nothing had happened. I left town, I went away, but I came back years later after he was transferred. And now I'm seeing the same story repeat itself. I was astonished. I wasn't alone, I wasn't the only one. "Why did you never tell anyone?" I asked. "Because no one would believe it," she said, wiping her tears. "And at the time, I didn't have the courage. But now I do. And you need to have it too." That meeting changed everything. For the first time, I didn't feel alone anymore. There was someone who understood, someone who had gone through the same thing. Helen told me, "Emma, you need to decide what you're going to do with this pregnancy. But whatever your decision is, it needs to be yours, not his." I knew she was right, but the pressure was immense, the threats, the stares, the isolation. That night, lying in bed, I placed my hand on my belly again. I was almost 3 months along. Soon, I wouldn't be able to hide it anymore. And then I made a decision. I wasn't going to have an abortion, not because he wanted it, not because the town was judging me, but because that was my choice. I was going to have this baby, and I was going to expose Daniel for what he really was. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to find a way. The decision was made, but putting it into practice was another story. I needed proof. I needed something concrete that showed Daniel was lying, that he wasn't the saint everyone thought he was. Sophie helped me. She suggested I save all the old messages he had sent me before blocking me. I had taken screenshots of some, not many, but enough to show there was something between us. "This doesn't prove you're pregnant by him," Sophie said, "but it proves you had a relationship, that he lied." It was a start. I decided to look for a lawyer, not in our town, but in a larger city, a few kilometers away. I made an appointment with a lawyer specializing in abuse of power cases. When I entered his office, I felt my heart race. The lawyer, a middle-aged man named Mr. Laurent, received me seriously. I told everything, every detail. I showed the messages. I explained about the pregnancy. He listened in silence, and when I finished, he said, "Emma, you have a case, but I need to be honest with you. Cases against members of the clergy are extremely difficult. The church has resources. It has influence, and often victims end up being re-victimized by the process." My heart sank. "But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try," he continued. "It just means you need to be prepared for a long battle, and a painful one." I knew he was right, but I had no choice. I couldn't let Daniel win. Mr. Laurent explained the next steps to me. I would need to do a DNA test as soon as the baby was born. I would need to gather more evidence, and I would need to be ready to face public exposure. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked. "I am," I replied, with more firmness than I felt. When I left the office, I felt a mixture of hope and terror. Hope, because I was finally doing something. Terror, because I knew what was coming. But then, everything got worse. 2 days later, I received a call. It was my mother. Her voice was trembling, full of anger and disappointment. "Emma, Father Daniel was here today." My blood froze. "What did he say?" "He said you're spreading lies about him, that you're trying to destroy his reputation. He said you need psychological help, that you're making up stories." I felt the world spin around me. "Mom, it's not true. He's lying." "Emma, why would a priest lie? He's a man of God." "Mom, please believe me." But she didn't believe, or didn't want to believe. The call ended with her saying she needed time to think, to process. I collapsed. He had succeeded. He had turned my own mother against me. In the following days, the situation became unbearable. People began approaching me on the street, some with pity, others with anger. "You should be ashamed," a woman told me in front of the market, "making up things like that about a priest." I tried to defend myself, but my voice wouldn't come out. Sophie was furious. "Emma, you need to go to the media. You need to expose him publicly." "What if no one believes?" I asked. "Then at least you tried." But I was afraid of judgment, afraid of the consequences. That's when Helen came looking for me again. She had an idea. "Emma, I've contacted some other women who were also victims of priests in other parishes. They're willing to speak. If we unite, we'll have more strength." That gave me hope. I wasn't alone. There were others. We scheduled a meeting in a reserved room in a library in another town. There were 5 women in total, each with a story of pain, of manipulation, of abuse. One of them, a woman named Isabel, was only 17 when she was seduced by a priest. She got pregnant, and he forced her to have an abortion, paying for the underground clinic. Another, named Marie, had been threatened with death when she tried to expose the priest who abused her. Hearing these stories made me realize the magnitude of the problem. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just Daniel. It was a pattern. A system that protected abusers and silenced victims. We decided to act together. We would seek out the press, we would tell our stories, and we would hope that someone would listen to us. But before we could do that, Daniel acted first. He made a public statement during Sunday Mass. He said he was being targeted by a defamatory campaign, by disturbed women. He asked for prayers, he asked for the community's support, and the community responded. Hundreds of people signed a petition in support of him. Letters of support arrived at the parish every day. He was being portrayed as the victim. I was being portrayed as the villain. The pressure was unbearable. I stopped leaving the house. I stopped answering the phone. Sophie brought food to me because I couldn't go to the market without being attacked. And then, in the middle of all this, I began to bleed. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was lying in bed when I felt a sharp pain in my abdomen, and then the blood. Sophie rushed me to the hospital in the neighboring town. I was terrified. I'm going to lose the baby, I thought. I'm going to lose everything. The doctors examined me. They did ultrasounds, and after hours of anguish, they told me the baby was fine, but I needed absolute rest. The stress was putting the pregnancy at risk. "You need to get away from any stressful situation," the doctor said, "or you could lose this child." But how could I get away? Stress was my life now. When I returned home that night, I found another anonymous letter under my door. This time it said, "God will punish you. You and that bastard child." I fell to the floor and cried until I had no more tears. Sophie hugged me. "Emma, you need to get out of here. You need to go far away, at least until the baby is born." She was right. I couldn't stay there anymore. Not like that. But the idea of running away destroyed me, because it meant Daniel had won, that he had silenced me, that he had destroyed me. That night, alone in my room, I looked at the ceiling and whispered, "I'm not going to give up. I won't." But the truth is, I was exhausted, broken, without strength, and Daniel knew it. He knew he was winning. A few days later, I received one last message from him, from another unknown number. "You still have time to do the right thing, Emma, before it's too late." I blocked the number, but the message was engraved in my mind. He wasn't going to stop. He was going to keep pressuring me until I broke completely, but something inside me refused to break. Something small, a weak flame, but still alive, and as long as that flame existed, I was going to keep fighting, even if I was alone, even if it seemed impossible, because I wasn't just Emma. I was the mother of this child, and I was going to protect her, no matter the cost. 3 weeks had passed since the bleeding. I was 4 months pregnant. My belly was starting to show. I could no longer hide it with loose clothes. Sophie convinced me to stay at her house for a few days. I couldn't stand being alone anymore. The nights were the worst. I woke up sweating, with nightmares where Daniel chased me, where the entire town stoned me. But even at Sophie's house, I had no peace. The anonymous messages continued. Now they came to my email, to my social media. People I didn't even know insulted me, called me a liar, a destroyer of families. "How can you do this to a man of God?" said one message. "You're going to burn in hell," said another. I stopped looking, I stopped reading, but the damage was already done. It was Helen who gave me the idea. "Emma, there's an investigative journalist in Lyon. She did a report about abuses in the church a few years ago. Maybe she can help you." I hesitated. Exposing everything publicly was scary. But what else did I have to lose? We contacted the journalist, a woman named Claire Dubois. She agreed to meet with us. We scheduled at a discreet cafe far from my town. Claire was a woman in her 40s, with a serious and determined look. She listened to me for more than 2 hours. She asked questions. She asked for proof. I showed the messages. I showed the medical records of the pregnancy. I told everything. When I finished, she said, "Emma, I believe you, and I want to help you, but I need you to understand. This is going to become public. Your life is going to be exposed, and people are going to attack you even more before they believe you." "I know," I replied, "but I can't live like this anymore. I can't let him win." Claire nodded. "Then let's begin." In the following days, Claire began to investigate. She talked to Helen, to the other women who were also victims. She looked for documents, records, anything that could prove a pattern of behavior. And that's when she discovered something shocking. Daniel wasn't the first priest in that parish to be accused of abuse. There were internal diocese records showing that other priests had been quietly transferred after similar accusations. The church knew and covered it up. "Emma," Claire told me on the phone with a serious voice, "this is bigger than you imagine. It's not just about Daniel. It's about an entire system." That gave me strength. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for all the women who were silenced before me. But Daniel discovered what we were doing, and he acted. It was on a Sunday. I hadn't been to Mass in weeks. But Sophie went, and she told me what happened. Daniel went up to the pulpit, as always, but this time he didn't talk about the Bible. He talked about me. "Brothers and sisters," he began, with a voice trembling with indignation. "There is a woman in this community who is trying to destroy me, who is spreading horrible lies, who is making up stories to tarnish my reputation and the reputation of this parish." Sophie told me the church fell into absolute silence. "This woman," he continued, "is pregnant, and she's trying to blame me for it. But I swear, before God and all of you, that I never touched her, that I never had any kind of improper relationship with her." He made a dramatic pause. "And now she's working with journalists to create a defamatory campaign against me, against the church, against everything that is sacred." Sophie said several people began to cry. Some stood up and applauded Daniel. Others shouted words of support. "We're with you, Father. We won't let them destroy you." When Sophie told me this, I felt as if I had been stabbed. He had turned the narrative completely. Now, it was no longer him against me. It was the entire church against me. "Emma," Sophie said, holding my hands, "you need to speak. Now." She was right. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Claire scheduled a press conference for the following week. It would be in the capital, in a neutral location. I, Helen, and the other women would tell our stories publicly. I was terrified, but determined. The days leading up to the press conference were the worst of my life. I received death threats, people saying they were going to find me, that they were going to hurt me. Sophie called the police. They said they couldn't do anything without concrete evidence. They just recommended that I not go out alone. My mother finally called me, but not to support me. "Emma, you're destroying our family. People won't stop talking. You need to stop this." "Mom, I'm not making anything up. I don't want to hear it. You chose this path. Now you're going to have to deal with the consequences alone." And she hung up. That broke me. But it also made me angry. Angry at Daniel. Angry at the church. Angry at everyone who chose to protect an abuser instead of protecting the victims. The night before the press conference, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, looking at the ceiling with my hand on my belly. "I'm going to do this for you," I whispered to the baby, "so you grow up in a world where people aren't afraid to speak the truth." On the day of the press conference, Sophie drove me to the capital. Helen and the other women were already there, all nervous, all scared, but all determined. Claire briefed us. "You're going to sit here. I'll do an introduction, and then each of you will tell your story. Be honest, be direct, and don't be afraid." When we entered the room, there were dozens of journalists, cameras, microphones, camera flashes. My heart was beating so hard I thought I was going to faint. Claire began. "Good morning. My name is Claire Dubois, and I'm here today to expose a systematic pattern of abuse within the Catholic Church in this region. With me are 5 brave women who decided to share their stories." She looked at me. It was my turn. I stood up. My voice trembled, but I began. "My name is Emma, and Father Daniel manipulated me, seduced me, and when I got pregnant, he pressured me to have an abortion. Meanwhile, he preached against abortion from the pulpit. He lied to the entire community. He isolated me, he threatened me, and he did this because he knew no one would believe me." Tears streamed down my face, but I continued. "I'm not here to destroy the church. I'm here because I can't stay silent anymore, because there are other women who went through the same thing, and because we need justice." The room fell silent, and then the questions began. "Do you have proof?" "Yes, I have messages. I have medical records, and I'm going to do a DNA test as soon as the baby is born." Father Daniel denies everything. "What do you have to say?" I expected him to deny it, because that's what abusers do. They lie, they manipulate, and they count on the victim's silence. The other women also spoke, each story more painful than the last. When the press conference ended, I was exhausted, but I also felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Because finally I had spoken, and the world had listened. The press conference spread like wildfire. Within hours it was on every newscast. My face was in every newspaper. My story was on every news website. And with it came the hatred. My phone wouldn't stop receiving messages. Thousands of them. Some of support, most of hatred. "You're a prostitute. You're going to hell. How dare you attack a man of God?" I stopped looking. Sophie took my phone and turned off notifications. "Don't read that, Emma. It's not worth it." But the damage was already done. My name was marked forever. The diocese issued an official statement the next day. They denied everything. They said the accusations were unfounded and part of a defamatory campaign against the church. They said Father Daniel was a man of integrity and dedication, and that they would defend his reputation with all necessary resources. Claire was furious. They're doing exactly what they always do, protecting the abuser and attacking the victim. But something unexpected happened. Other women began to appear, women I had never seen. Women from other towns, other parishes, all with similar stories, all victims of priests who abused their power. Within a week, Claire had more than 20 testimonies. "Emma," she told me on the phone, "this is becoming a national case. The media is pressuring the diocese, and the pressure is working." But the pressure was also working against me. My house was vandalized. Someone threw red paint on the door. They wrote "liar" on the wall. They broke the windows. The police finally acted. They said they were going to investigate. But I had no hope. I knew the people who did that would never be found. Sophie insisted I stay at her house permanently. "It's not safe for you to go back there." I agreed. I had no choice. My mother didn't talk to me anymore. My father didn't either. I was completely alone, except for Sophie and Helen. But then something surprising happened. One of the most respected women in the parish, Mrs. Margaret, the same one who had avoided me weeks ago, showed up at Sophie's house. "Emma," she said with tears in her eyes, "I need to apologize to you." I was shocked. I didn't believe you. I thought you were lying. But after I saw the press conference, after I heard the other women, I realized I was wrong. "And I'm sorry." Tears streamed down my face. "Thank you," was all I could say. She took my hands. "You're very brave. And I'm going to tell everyone I was wrong. I'll do what I can to help you." That gave me strength, because it meant the truth was starting to emerge, that people were starting to see. But Daniel didn't stay quiet. He gave an interview to a Catholic television channel. He sat with tears in his eyes and said, "I am a victim. I dedicated my life to serving God and the community, and now I'm being destroyed by lies. I forgive these women because they don't know what they're doing." That enraged me. He was making himself the victim. He was manipulating the narrative again. But Claire had an ace up her sleeve. She had gained access to the diocese's internal records, and there were documents showing that Daniel had been transferred from his previous parish after a complaint of inappropriate behavior. The church knew. They knew from the beginning, and even so they placed him in another parish. Claire published the documents, and the reaction was explosive. The national press began covering the case. Politicians began talking about the need for independent investigations. The pressure on the diocese became unbearable, and finally they acted. The diocese announced that Father Daniel would be temporarily removed while an internal investigation was conducted. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was tiredness, because I knew internal investigation meant the church was going to try to cover everything up again. But Claire didn't give up. "Emma, we need to take this to civil justice. We can't leave this only in the church's hands." Mr. Laurent, my lawyer, filed a lawsuit against Daniel and against the diocese. Charges of abuse of power, psychological manipulation, and institutional cover-up. The legal battle began, and it would be long. Meanwhile, my pregnancy was advancing. I was 6 months along. My belly was big, the baby moved all the time, and whenever I felt those movements, I remembered why I was doing all this. It wasn't just for me, it was for this child, so she could grow up in a world where the truth mattered. But the price was being high, too high. My mental health was destroyed. I had nightmares every night, panic attacks during the day. The psychologist, Dr. Claire, told me I was suffering from post-traumatic stress. "Emma, you went through immense trauma. It's normal to feel this, but you need to take care of yourself, for the baby, and for you." I tried, but it was difficult, very difficult. And then, something I didn't expect happened. Daniel showed up in front of Sophie's house. I was alone. Sophie had gone out to buy groceries. I heard the doorbell ring. I looked through the window and my blood froze. It was him. My instinct was not to open, but part of me wanted to face him, wanted to hear what he had to say. I opened the door, but left the security chain locked. "What do you want?" I asked with a trembling voice. He looked different. He wasn't wearing the cassock. He was in regular clothes. He had deep, dark circles. He looked tired, defeated. "Emma, I need to talk to you. You have nothing to say to me. Please, just 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I opened the door, but I stayed at the door, ready to close it at any moment. He looked at my belly, and for the first time I saw something different in his eyes. I don't know if it was regret, or fear, or maybe just desperation. "Emma, I'm sorry." I almost laughed. "You're sorry? You're sorry?" "I know I messed everything up. I know I hurt you. I was afraid. Afraid of losing everything." "And you think that justifies it?" My voice came out louder. "You manipulated me. You used me. You threatened me. And now you come here to say you're sorry." He lowered his head. "I didn't come here to justify myself. I came to tell you I'm going to admit it. I'm going to admit everything." I was shocked. "What?" "I'm going to confess. To the diocese. To justice. I'm going to tell the truth." I didn't know whether to believe it. "Why? Why now?" He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Because I can't stand living with this lie anymore. Because you were right, and I was wrong." I didn't know what to feel. Anger, relief, confusion, all at the same time. "If you're serious," I said with a firm voice, "then go. Go and tell the truth, but don't expect me to forgive you." He nodded. "I don't expect it. I just wanted you to know." And then he turned and walked away. I closed the door and collapsed on the floor, crying. Sophie arrived minutes later and found me there. "Emma, what happened?" I told everything, and she was shocked. "Do you think he's really going to confess?" "I don't know," I replied. "But if he doesn't, we continue." And we continued. Because this fight was no longer just mine. It was for all the women who were silenced, and we weren't going to give up. 3 days after Daniel's visit to Sophie's house, he did what he promised. He scheduled a meeting with the diocese bishop and confessed everything. The confession wasn't public, at least not immediately. But Claire Dubois, the journalist, had sources inside the diocese, and she learned every detail. Daniel admitted the relationship with Emma. He admitted he knew she was pregnant. He admitted he pressured her to have an abortion. And most importantly, he admitted it wasn't the first time. There were other women, in other parishes. Women he had manipulated, used and discarded. The church knew, it always knew, and it always covered it up, transferring him from one parish to another, as if the problem simply disappeared by changing cities. Claire published the complete story, with documents, with testimonies, with irrefutable proof. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The diocese tried to do damage control. They issued a statement saying they were deeply shocked and that they would take severe measures. But it was too late. Trust was broken. Protests began to emerge in front of churches, not against faith, but against the institution that protected abusers. Believers raised signs, "Justice for the victims, no more silence, the church needs to change." The pressure became unbearable, and finally the diocese really acted. Father Daniel was officially removed from all priestly functions, not temporarily, permanently. He was laicized, expelled from the clergy, and most importantly, he was handed over to civil justice. The public prosecutor's office opened a criminal investigation, not just against Daniel, but against the diocese members who covered up his crimes. The charges included abuse of power, psychological manipulation, harassment, and institutional complicity. The trial began 6 months later. Emma had already given birth. A girl, small, delicate, perfect. She named her Lily, a name that represented hope, a new beginning. The DNA test confirmed what everyone already knew. Daniel was the father. The definitive proof was there, documented, undeniable. On the day of the trial, Emma entered the courtroom with her head held high. Sophie was by her side, Helen too, and dozens of other women who decided to support her. Daniel was there, sitting next to his lawyers. He wasn't wearing a cassock. He no longer had the confident posture of before. He looked smaller, broken, defeated. When Emma's eyes met his, she didn't feel anger, not hatred, just a deep sadness. Sadness for what he had destroyed, for the lives he had ruined, for the trust he had betrayed. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witnesses were heard, evidence was presented. One by one, the women he had abused took the stand and told their stories. The prosecutor, a firm and determined woman named Dr. Simone, gave no quarter. She demolished every argument of the defense. She showed the pattern of behavior. She showed the systematic manipulation. She showed how the church had been complicit. When it was Emma's turn to testify, she took a deep breath. She looked at her daughter, who was in Sophie's arms in the audience, and she spoke. She told everything. From the first day he manipulated her, until the moment he threatened her. Her voice didn't tremble. She didn't cry. She just spoke the truth. When she finished, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. The defense tried to argue that Daniel was repentant, that he had made mistakes, but that he deserved a second chance, that he was suffering psychologically. But the prosecutor responded with a simple question. And the victims? Did they get a second chance when they were manipulated, threatened, and destroyed? There was no answer. The jury deliberated for 2 days, and when they returned, the verdict was clear. Guilty on all charges. Daniel was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Additionally, he was ordered to pay compensation to each of the victims, and the diocese was ordered to pay a multi-million-dollar fine and to implement strict measures of transparency and protection for victims. When the sentence was read, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in months. Relief. It wasn't happiness, it wasn't victory, it was just relief that finally, there was justice. Daniel was led away in handcuffs. He looked at Emma one last time before leaving the room. His eyes were red, but she didn't feel pity. She just turned and left. Outside the courthouse, dozens of journalists were waiting. Cameras, microphones, questions. Claire was there too. She hugged Emma tight. "You did it. You really did it." Emma gave a brief statement. "I didn't do this alone. I did this with the help of brave women who refused to stay silent. I did this for my daughter, and for all the women who are still afraid to speak. This victory isn't just mine, it's all of ours." Applause echoed, and for the first time in a long time, Emma smiled. In the months that followed, changes began to happen. The diocese implemented an independent complaint channel. Training on abuse of power became mandatory, and several parishes began reviewing their internal processes. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fast, but it was a start. Emma returned to her hometown, but this time it was different. The people who had attacked her now apologized, some with sincerity, others with shame. Mrs. Margaret organized a meeting in the parish community. She asked for the floor and said, "I was wrong. We were wrong. And we need to learn from this. We need to believe the victims. We need to protect the vulnerable. And we need to stop putting religious leaders on untouchable pedestals." Many agreed. Some still resisted. But the seed of change had been planted. Emma began working with Claire on an organization to support victims of religious abuse. They created a support network with psychologists, lawyers, and social workers. Hundreds of women sought help, and each one of them was heard, believed, supported. Emma's mother finally came looking for her. It was months later. She knocked on the door of Sophie's house, where Emma still lived. When Emma opened the door, her mother broke down in tears. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have protected you. I was a terrible mother." Emma hugged her mother, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the family was beginning to heal. "I understand, Mom. I forgive you." The relationship didn't return to what it was. Maybe it never would, but it was a start. Emma raised her daughter with love, strength, and determination. Lily grew up knowing the truth, knowing that her mother had fought, knowing that justice, although slow, was possible. And whenever Lily asked about her father, Emma answered honestly, "He made terrible mistakes. But you're not a mistake. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." 5 years had passed since the trial. Emma was 30 now. Lily was 5, a vibrant, curious child, full of life. Emma never imagined her story would have the impact it did, but it did, and in ways she could never have predicted. The organization she founded with Claire grew exponentially. What began as a small support network transformed into a national movement. They had offices in 6 cities, specialized psychologists, dedicated lawyers, and hundreds of volunteers. More than 1,000 women sought help in the first 3 years. Some were recent victims, others had carried secrets for decades. All were heard, all were believed, and many, finally, found justice. Emma became an important voice in the fight against institutional abuse. She gave lectures, participated in panels, talked with legislators about the need for stricter laws. She never imagined she would become an activist. But life led her down that path, and she embraced it. But not everything was easy. Far from it. The scars of trauma were still there. Emma still had occasional nightmares, still felt anxiety in certain situations. Therapy became a permanent part of her life, and she wasn't ashamed of it. She knew that healing didn't mean forgetting, it meant learning to live with the scars. Sophie continued being her best friend, her soul sister. She was there at all the important moments. On Lily's first birthday, at Emma's graduation in psychology, which she completed years later, on difficult nights when the weight of everything seemed too much. Helen also remained close. She became like a grandmother to Lily. And together, Emma and Helen created a mentorship program, connecting older victims with newer ones, proving that healing was possible, that life continued, that there was hope. Emma's relationship with her mother improved, but never returned to what it was. There was a distance, a carefulness. Her mother tried, really tried, but Emma knew that broken trust didn't fix itself completely, and that was okay. She had made peace with it. As for Daniel, he was serving his sentence in a prison a few hours away. Emma never visited him, never wanted to. She heard he was participating in rehabilitation programs, that he was working in the prison library, that he wrote a formal apology letter to each of his victims. Emma never opened the letter he sent her. She simply stored it in a drawer, unread. Maybe one day she would open it, maybe not. But at that moment, she didn't need his repentance to move forward. She had already moved on. The church continued changing, slowly, but changing. New protocols were implemented. Independent complaint channels were created in several dioceses. Mandatory training on abuse of power became standard. But there was still resistance. There were still parishes that ignored the rules. There were still leaders who protected abusers. And that's why the work of Emma and so many others was so important. Because the fight hadn't ended. It would never end completely. But every victory counted. Emma began writing a book telling her story, not to relive the pain, but so other women would know they weren't alone, that their voices mattered, that justice, although difficult, was possible. The book was published 3 years after the trial. It became a bestseller, not because it was sensationalist, but because it was honest, raw, real. Women from across the country wrote to Emma, some thanking her for giving voice to what they felt, others sharing their own stories, some just saying, "Thank you for fighting." Emma responded to every message, every email, because she remembered what it was like to feel alone, and she never wanted another woman to feel that way. Lily grew up knowing her mother's story. Emma never hid it. She told it in an age-appropriate way what had happened, and Lily, with the innocent wisdom of a child, said, "Mommy, you're a hero." Emma smiled. "No, my love, I'm just a woman who refused to stay silent." But to many people, she was a hero, a symbol of resistance, of courage, of truth. At a 5-year anniversary event of the organization, Emma went up on stage to speak. The room was full, hundreds of people, victims, supporters, activists. She looked at the audience and began, "5 years ago, I was at the lowest point of my life. I was pregnant, alone, terrified. I was being attacked from all sides. And there were moments when I thought about giving up, about simply disappearing." A pause. But I didn't give up. Because there were people who believed in me when no one else did. Because there were brave women who spoke before me and opened the way. And because I knew that if I stayed silent, other women would suffer what I suffered. She looked at Lily, who was in the front row with Sophie. This fight wasn't easy. It isn't easy, and it never will be. But it's necessary, because as long as there are people in positions of power who abuse that power, we need to be here, vigilant, brave, united. Applause echoed through the room. And to all the women who are still afraid to speak, I want to say, I believe you. We believe you. And when you're ready, we'll be here. Tears streamed down the faces of many people in the audience, and Emma felt once again that it had all been worth it. After the event, a young woman approached. She couldn't have been more than 20. She was trembling, nervous. Emma, I wanted to thank you. Your story gave me courage to report the priest from my parish. I filed the complaint last week. Emma hugged the young woman tight. You're very brave, and we're going to support you. You're not alone. Those moments were what made Emma remember why she continued, why she spoke, why she fought. That night, at home, after putting Lily to bed, Emma stood alone on the porch. She looked at the starry sky, and for the first time in years, she felt a deep peace. She had survived, not just survived, she had thrived. She had transformed her pain into purpose, her tragedy into strength, her story into hope for others. She was no longer the naive girl who blindly believed a man just because he wore a cassock. She was a woman, a mother, a fighter, and her story wasn't one of victimization. It was one of overcoming, because in the end, Daniel hadn't won. The church that tried to silence her hadn't won. The system that protected abusers hadn't won. She had won. All the women who stood up had won. And this victory wasn't just theirs. It was for all the women who would come after, who would know that their voices mattered, that truth won, that justice, although slow, was possible. Emma went inside, lay down beside her daughter, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You're going to grow up in a better world, I promise." And she kept that promise every day, with every story she shared, with every woman she helped, with every system she challenged, because the forbidden marriage of Emma and Daniel wasn't just a story of abuse, it was a story of resistance, of courage, of transformation. And the legacy Emma left wasn't one of pain, it was one of hope. This is Emma's story, and of all the women who refused to stay silent.